why don't you, given that I'm neither Korean nor cool, why don't you walk us through what you think are the sort of highlights of what Korean culture has delivered over the last 20 years?
Right. Well, the pop culture push was something that happened suddenly because it was an invention. It didn't happen over time. It wasn't organically built at all. As with digital technology, pop culture was an area where they felt like they didn't need a lot of infrastructure. They didn't have to build factories. They just had to churn it out. And they were focusing on the fact that it was sort of easy to make rather than the question of does anybody want it. Mm-hmm. They sort of did things first and then asked questions.
We got girls who sing. We can have girl groups. Why not do that? That's
right. Right. It just never occurred to them that it wouldn't work out, and that has a lot to do with their success, I think, in that area.
So you in your book point to a fairly heavy-handed governmental role, which appears to have been reasonably successful. I think I feel compelled to say, as an economist, just because very well-managed East Asian countries are able to do stuff in terms of industrial policy, like Korea or Singapore, doesn't mean you should try this at home. I don't think a well-designed American cultural strategy would be particularly sensible. So tell us about how Korean pop fuses influences from different cultures.
Right. So if you listen to K-pop, for example, people have noticed that the sound is very Europop, or it sounds like something that might be an entry in the Eurovision Song Contest, for example. And there's a reason for that, which is they buy these songs by the hundreds, literally, from the song factories in Sweden. And as we know, Sweden has produced a lot of pop groups, with ABBA being the most, yeah, right. So the tunes are Euro influenced. The dance is pretty much always choreographed by Americans. The technology is Korean. So it's very natural for them to fuse these together, and they don't see it as forced or strange or even particularly multicultural. They see it as stripped of geographic or cultural influences.
In some sense, that's Seoul as well, right? I mean, it's a happy mixture of different cultures and different forces. In some sense, that reminds us that that's always what makes cities really great, when they're able to bring together different strands and combine them and make something that's new and totally different.
Right.
Help us understand how K-pop works. I mean, there's this American tradition in the 50s and 60s of these managed girl groups that came out of Detroit, came out of New York. How is it like that? How is it different? How does the process work?
Yeah, it is very similar to sort of the Motown model, or as you say, the pretty much how music was turned out in the 50s and 60s, where the concept would exist first in the mind of the producer, and then people would audition for it. One very big difference is the age at which they're recruited. They don't recruit people in their 20s. They recruit people who are 12, ideally.
So this is like Menudo, I think, right? Wasn't this this was a Western?
That's not a bad analogy, actually. Yeah. And the idea being, I mean, not just that they're cute or whatever, but they will work better as a group if they essentially grow up together. So they recruit them at 12, but they might not appear in public until they're 16 or 17. And by that time, they're basically like brothers or sisters.
So they will spend 4 years co-training until they're shown to the public.
Co-training, pretty much eating, sleeping, I mean, not sleeping together, but eating together, living together, yes.
So your book was published, I think, in 2014, is that right? So what have you seen, so it's been 2.5 years. What has been coming out of Korean cultural creativity since the book that's entered your orbit?
Well, I think I kind of would have expected by this time that they would have evolved past the K-pop angle, and no one is more surprised than I am that it has continued. And in fact, rather than develop into something more advanced, because if you had asked me what I think was going to happen, and when I was on the book tour, I said, oh, well, they're going to put away this pop culture stuff and they're going to focus on medical technology and holograms and lasers. I mean, they're still doing that. What's instead happened, though, is the normalization of Korean popular culture. And one example being that Korean dramas are actually really popular, and not because people watch it ironically.
Are they popular in the West or primarily in Asia, the Korean dramas?
Well, increasingly the West, I would say. South America, they're very popular. The Middle East, and strangely, countries that are predominantly Islamic, where they can't show American shows because they're too racy, and also they're just American. Right. Whereas Korea has a politically neutral association, and they're very popular there.
So how is K-drama different than Western soap operas? What is it that's uniquely Korean about them?
Well, the closest Western analog would probably be the telenovelas, in the sense that they're highly emotional. There's a lot of crying. In American soap operas, you have emotions, but it's not normal to cry, especially for men. I think a lot of that actually comes from Korea. I mean, Hollywood is the package for everything, but a lot of it, the emotional profile comes from Korean storytelling traditions, where, again, the struggle with family underlies all of the decisions you make and any internal conflicts you have. And marrying somebody might be a betrayal of your family. That's another reason why it's so popular in very traditional cultures. I mentioned the Middle East. There's a first century Korean drama that has 80% market share for its time slot in Iran. And I asked somebody why, and they said, well, the cultures are very similar. Things that would not be considered huge acts of rebellion in the West can be something that might drive you to consider suicide in a very conservative culture where you're very close with your family, and breaking from family means you have nobody in the world. And that's very much a part of Korean storytelling traditions, where a lot of the conflicts have to do with devotion to parent. Yes, parent-child. Do I sacrifice my life to cure my father's blindness? That's one of the most famous Korean fairy tales of all time, actually. And that you can, right? There's a Shimchung. She decides to kill herself because it'll give her father's sight. And while that literally doesn't happen in Korean dramas, some very, very similar tropes come up, actually.